This is in reference to Billy's Talking Points memo of Tuesday, September 23rd, bombing ISIS in Iraq and Syria. The first thing I'd like to say is that I see how you had kudos to yourself right at the beginning, Billy, by indicating that this is something that you had told President Obama to do 3 months before, and you referred back to an earlier Talking Points memo where you went into that. Now, the one thing that I noticed about it, you were very adamant about President Obama bombing, but you referred to them as Al-Qaeda and not as ISIS. Of course, it really should be ISIL. But there were so many, and those were things that were at the point where, yes, drastic action needed to be looked at and taken very soon. But I'd like to point out, the reason why you suggested bombing at that particular time is because you didn't want to do anything but have the United States go in hog wild by itself. Because to you and many people of your ilk, it's war all day, every day. That's what you want. And of course, even though ISIL is a very terrible group, you always have to refer to them as savages, which is true, but you do it to make your point across that the only solution to this is bombing. Now, my memory is very good about this at the time, and that was right when ISIL was just beginning to come in to Iraq after being in Syria for a number of years and taking over a number of towns. Quite a bit of butchery, yes, there was. But also at the time, remember, and you did mention it a little bit yourself, but you only mentioned it in passing, is that those towns were being guarded by Iraqi military police force or whatever, and they left. They dropped their weapons and they ran. And that's how ISIL got, as you pointed out, tons of American hardware, tons and tons of American hardware. And what we had here going on was ISIL, being a Sunni faction, was going into Sunni territories in Iraq that predominantly were being monitored by Shia soldiers. So the Shia soldiers cut and ran, and of course this was another thing that Obama had been working on for a long time, which was to try to get one Maliki out, which was finally did. But also, by the time he even got into office, Bush had allowed the Shia government in Iraq, headed by al-Maliki, to basically become a Shia theocracy. So basically, if you had Shia soldiers in Sunni cities in northern and western Iraq, they had no reason to want to protect those people, because they were against them anyway. And if they had a few Shia Sunnis in there, they weren't going to go against their own people when ISIL came in. Now, if al-Maliki had opened up the political system in Iraq, allowed more and greater participation of Sunnis, of Kurds, not only with the Shia, then there's a good possibility that ISIL never could have made a move in there, because the Iraqi army would have wiped them out, because their tactics are pretty simple. They go in and assess a town real quick, they throw in a couple people for suicide bomber, they find a small opening, they rush in, and they take over everything. And even though you've never mentioned this, and I've watched you pretty closely for the last several months, is that outside of the initial gains that ISIL had in, let's say, May, June, possibly early July, they have been stymied in many instances after that, because, like I said, they have a pretty simplistic method of operation. The town is guarded, they find an opening, they exploit the opening, they go in and rush. And of course, they were at the same time that the military in these Iraqi cities just cut and ran, leaving tremendous amounts of hardware for ISIL to have. Also the banking system, and of course they could do the political system at all. But I understand that you wanted to emphasize your point is that you were the one that told the president what to do before it was really time to do it, even though we had ample opportunity I shouldn't say, we needed to have some time to get together our coalition forces. Now, why did Obama do these coalition forces instead of bombing right then and there? Because he didn't want to get bogged down in another Iraq. He didn't want to get bogged down in another Afghanistan. He didn't want to bring boots on the ground into these places. And he knew that that could not happen just by bombing alone. So even though, Billy, all you want to do is bomb, the president knew that even if he bombed the crap out of them, there still would be a vacuum in there, and who would fill the vacuum? Because we didn't have a secure army in Iraq. We don't know what would happen. So you also mentioned that. Well, I don't even remember what you mentioned else. But the whole point of your argument was that you knew what was going on ahead of time. You should get the kudos for it because you said it 3 months ago. And that President Obama has finally taken what you said he should have done. But at the same time, there were so many things that were going on in there, is that to go in there blindly, like you had asked, like you had wanted to do, was absolutely the worst possible thing that could have been done. Because if you had created a vacuum in there, again, something that worse would have happened. What has happened since then? Well, since then, there's been a new government formed in Iraq. They had to have more participation of both the Sunni and the Shia. I don't know how well that's going. Time will tell. All right, but they did make the effort. They did get rid of Maliki. He wanted to stay. There was no coup d'etat. He got out of there. And, I don't know, Iraq, I guess they're pumping their oil, so I guess that's all good. And I know that ISIL is getting money from oil. I don't know how they're getting it, but that's another thing that needs to be addressed. That's part of Iraqi sovereignty, and they need to address it. But with the coalition, as you mentioned before, is that some people might want to be silent partners and do some things that they don't want to get attention for. Saudi Arabia has opened up. Jordan has opened up. Turkey a little bit has opened up. I can't remember, Qatar. So these are things that are important because, they have to have their own skin in the game because, that's a very volatile area over there. And we need that area right now because of good old President Reagan, who took the solar energy off the roof of the White House in 1981 and brought the oil boys back in. So we're still heavily dependent on the Middle Eastern oil, even though we don't get it directly, but we could have set the pace way back when if Carter had stayed in office. So it's a very volatile part of the world. We need partners to work with us in all of this. We cannot continue to be the world's policeman. I know you put a jag in there against Putin. Putin's just a little punk that would like to increase his geography. He's doing it for strategic reasons. Again, one of the bigger reasons is that the economy in Russia is going downhill, and that keeps his popularity up. The last point that you brought up again was your stupid, inane idea about having a separate and unique, let's just say, army that would be run by the Congress, trained by our military, so that they could expedite forces anywhere overseas. Again, I still think that's a stupid argument. You seem to indicate that without a doubt that will happen. I don't think that will happen, but that was basically your premise for your talking points for the Tuesday, and I only watched the first 10 seconds or so of who you bring on, just to see who you bring on, to see how you're going to do it. And who did you bring on is that guy Prince from Blackwater or Z or whatever the name of his company is right now. And then I knew is that he wants money. He knows that if he can get that standing army, he's going to have a lot of money to put in there. Because how are we going to even determine who we're going to hire? Hey, he's got all these guys. They're all ex-military. They all go in for him. He can perform a lot of the logistics, etc. So he's in it for money. And again, I know Prince. I've read about Prince quite a bit. Yeah, he wants to be in a fight. He loves to fight. Do you remember how great it is? And you said the Geneva Convention and etc. in terms of how these people were monitored. Remember how well Blackwater treated the average Iraqi person if they just happened to get in their way, even under normal circumstances? Yeah, they got blown away. Remember that one thing in that one square or circle area? In 2005, 2007, that blew away 18 people just because somebody got a little rattled. Yeah, that's the type of person that you want to have lead this type of army, Billy, because that's why you brought him on right afterwards. I didn't bother hearing anything about it. I didn't bother watching it. But then again, that's what you want. You want war all the time. Your answer 3 months ago was war. Your answer today is let's have a new army to fight new wars. And all I can say is that's what he seemed to want. War all day, every day.